I'm Dr. Bill Pettit. I'm a psychiatrist and actually have my 50th graduation from medical school celebration this summer. So you can add the numbers, figuring I graduated from medical school at about age 27. And I reached double sevens just recently in doing a program in Bergen, Norway, which was a beautiful place to have my 77th. I'm a psychiatrist by training. I've retired from clinical psychiatry just a few months ago after many, many years of doing so. And I was a family doctor for the first 5 years with some surgical training, the first 5 years, and got interested in psychiatry. And I actually struggled a great deal with depression for many years, almost 20 years. I had 6 different psychiatrists that assisted me, and they were good people, and they helped me get out of college, and helped me get through college, and helped me get into through medical school and through my residency and through difficult times in my life. But I still was struggling. And I had come to believe that it was related to my genes and my biochemistry and my heredity. And I had no idea that it was coming from what I was doing with a powerful gift of thought that was given to me at birth to go through life. And so in 1983, I met Dr. George Pransky, who introduced me shortly thereafter to Mr. Sidney Banks. And on April Fool's Day of 1983, I sat with, you're grinning, I can grin too now. It was ironic that I was sitting in an audience with over 200 people listening to a man with a 9th grade education who was a welder. And within 15 minutes, I realized this welder with a 9th grade education knew many, 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 many times more about mental health than I did. Because I had 26 and a half years of schooling. I had probably 800 lectures on mental illness and medications, but I had no lectures on mental health. And yet, when I became board certified in psychiatry, they gave me the label that I was a mental health professional, which is sad in a way because it's just not true. I wasn't a mental health professional, and I was a mental illness professional. I knew a lot about mental illness, or at least thought I did at the time. And that's quite for those people that are listening, that may be quite a shock, but it's true. I did not have any lectures on mental health. And what is mental health to me? Mental health to me is living the vast majority of the time in a peaceful, lighthearted, joyful state of mind. And I've come to believe that that is our default setting, that that's really where we're meant to live. And I'm not saying that as a human being, we're going to be able to live there 100% of the time. But there's a hell of a lot of difference between living there 5% of the time versus 95% of the time, the quality of people's lives. And there's a researcher named Corey Keyes, who's a researcher affiliated with positive psychology, who's if I remember, he's got 5 or 6 articles that I've read the abstracts to, but not the full articles. But he talks about his questionnaire divides people up into 3 somewhat arbitrary sections of thriving, stressed but okay, which he calls moderately mentally healthy. But if you look at it, if people are saying, I'm stressed, but I'm coping okay. And languishing, which is people that are chronically overwhelmed. And sadly, in the United States, across education, across across financial, economic status. He found approximately 18% of the people living, 50% are stressed but okay, and 32%, almost 1 in 3, are literally languishing. They're overwhelmed. I think that if you look at those figures, 18%, 50%, 32%, that 82% of our population is either stressed, but okay, but having to do a lot of coping. I have a good friend of mine who's a wonderful teacher of the 3 principles that very humbly admits that prior to being exposed to the 3 principles, he was spending up to 4 hours a day meditating, just so he wouldn't be filled with anxiety. And I have been referred people or people that have sought me out that are spending an hour a day doing mindfulness, an hour a day doing yoga, an hour a day doing qigong, an hour a day doing and nothing against any of those practices, which can be in and of themselves very healthy, but they were done by these people just to maintain an ability to function at any level at all. And so they would certainly be in that group that they would say they were okay, but they were coping. And many of them, because of the chronic state of mental stress, were also having physical difficulties that they were struggling with. And I know some people get really uneasy when I even talk about that, but I think it's important to know that to me, the chronic state of mental stress is the one cause of all mental illness. And it is the primary cause of the vast majority of physical illness. And even when I use the word illness, and I know that what I'm saying is going to be new for people, and I'm not asking anybody that's listening to this report or this talk to believe anything that I say, and I really mean that. I'm because if you do, then you've just become a follower. You're just following something I said it, so taking it on as truth. But if you listen and the logic of what I say touches that place of truth inside of you as a listener and resonates where you just go, wow, I see that for myself, then you're not seeing it because I believe it. You're seeing it because you've seen it for yourself. And so I would say that that there's really one cause of all mental illness, and it's chronic mental stress. That when we activate, and I probably for many years used to spend probably 6 to 9 hours a day in some form of giving life to what I'll call stressful thinking and worry, guilt. I kind of now divide it up into the past, the future, and the present, because how do we take, if it really is our default setting to be in a state of lighthearted, loving state, what is it that we do, and how do we do that takes us away from that? And so I'm going to talk about these 3 principles of mind, thought, and consciousness as universal principles. But I'm thinking of my grandson was over yesterday and 2 days ago, and we were in the pool. We have a little pool here in Phoenix in the backyard, which makes the 105-degree temperatures tolerable, and especially in the morning when it's in the 80s. And he was sitting on the edge of the pool, and I had a rubber ball that was probably about 10 inches in diameter. It was hollow in the center, but I'd push it under the water about 18 inches. And when I would let go of it, of course, it would pop to the surface. And in doing so, it would bring water with it and all over his head and down his and he would laugh and get really tickled. But I say that because to me, mental well-being is like that ball. It's our home base is on the surface. That's where that ball's home base was. And it took a lot of effort to keep that ball under the water. And it was tiring. And I would suggest that many of the things that we call psychiatric symptoms are really alarm systems that have been given to us by whatever one wants to say as at the source, label at the source of the universe, that we've been given alarms, signals, signs that we are going in the wrong direction with so what are the three principles? Well, the three principles are the principles of universal mind, universal thought, and universal consciousness. And for anybody that gets interest there, I'm going to encourage them to pick up. Mr. Banks wrote 6 books. 5 of them teach through little novelettes. The one that I use frequently to teach is a little book called The Missing Link. And it even has spaces. It's so powerful that it can't really be read as prose. It's so powerful it has spaces in between. And I would just encourage people to take a look at it. I'll read his short introduction, which is 10 lines. He says, "There are those in this world who believe miracles do not happen. I can assure such skeptics that they do. With hope and faith as beacons, anything can happen. If these writings bring a second chance of life to just one human being, my work has not been in vain." And the last thing I'm going to read is one little paragraph at the end of the first chapter, or in the middle of the first chapter, where he says, "All human psyches are rooted in universal truth, and no person's psyche is better than any other's. Only to the degree of the individual's psychological and spiritual understanding does it appear to vary." Well, to me, that's not a belief. That's just a fact. That and it says spiritual understanding, a lot of people immediately go to religion and dogma. But all he's saying there is that there's formless truth in the universe. And I'm thinking, even I saw a quote from Max Planck, the founder of quantum physics, who says, consciousness, to me, all matter is a derivative of consciousness. We can't get behind. So even the physicists know that there was something, and always has been something, that is formless, that is before any matter that has been created. And that's pretty wild, to even have the scientists seeing that. And that creation, I know recently, in 2015, the 2 PhD physicists that won the Nobel Prize, and of course in the last 4 years has been confirmed even more than these 2 labs in the world, that what we call creation, the formation of matter, is actually accelerating faster and faster. Now, I can't wrap my intellect around that, because my little brain wants to know, and where in the hell it's going, but it's going into what we call the great nothingness, and creating more matter. And that's incredible. That's incredible. So universal mind is just speaking to the intelligence that's behind the universe, that's at the source of the universe, that allows a sperm and an egg to come together, and 9 months later, a little baby is born. We've got a new 2-month-old grandson who just looks so wise when you look into his eyes. And we were over there yesterday. He tries, if you try to communicate with him, he tries to communicate back. It's clear, that there's some intelligent life force that he's brought with him into form. So universal mind is really saying that there's an intelligent energy at the source of the universe that manifests in everything, um, and that we're a manifestation of that. Now, that has tremendous ramifications if we are really a manifestation of that formless energy that has the intelligence of all intelligence of everything, the same intelligence that allows the whales to go down to the Pacific and have their babies and come back to the Northwest every year, all learning the same new song every year. And you could go in nature, you could give 100,000 examples how the plants literally seek out from the rocks in the area the minerals that they need, and have a way of attracting those minerals from those rocks. I mean, there's things that are just mind-boggling. So the universal mind is just saying that we are part of, we're not separate from that which is at the source of the universe. And there's no doubt that some religions and some dogma initially they'll have trouble with that, because they've seen that creation as separate from the creator. And what I think the physicists and even I would say is that if you think of the logic that everything that takes form, the logic is that it has to be made of that formless energy. And so it's really a manifestation of that. So that's universal mind. And universal thought is just saying that there's a way of, if you will, bringing universal mind into form was what is happening with creation. That universal thought is creating constantly new matter. But at the same time, we as human beings, we have been given this power of thought that in order to go through life, you and I could not be having this conversation if we weren't gifted with this spiritual, meaning that it has no form. Nobody will ever be seen walking around with a little white box that says, "What do you have in it?" And somebody saying, "I've got the power of thought in here," right? It's just not going to happen. And so I was doing a program in the Czech Republic just about 2 weeks ago. And the wonderful thing about this understanding is that you keep having insights. And yet when you're not looking, you're just in a nice state of mind. And I had this insight that the power of thought that a lot of times people are trying to change their behavior, and that if you're looking at this as a train, if you looked like you had a train, I visited my friend George Pransky recently, and he had a train up on the counter, and it had an engine. And I would say that there is one behavior that when you talk about people's behavior, they think about somebody doing something physically, walking around, hitting something, picking something up. Or the other behavior would be what I'm doing right now, and you have the capability of, but you're not using right now, is the power to make sounds and to speak. And whether that be just a yell or a scream, or whether it be sentences in whatever language we speak. And I think most people, when you talk about behavior, that's what they think of. They think of actions and speech. But really, the one behavior that every one of the 7 billion people on this planet right now, I know are doing right now, is they're using the power of thought. They're thinking. And so I guess the power of thought would be the fact that the train has a energy source that it can move, but how it moves is the thoughts that a person thinks. So I always say, if you take the thought, whatever you think, immediately there's a feeling and a physiology. Every thought that we give life to, that's a powerful thing. There's a the cell biologist Bruce Lipton would say, and other people, cell biologists would say, that we are approximately 50 trillion cells acting as one organism. And every thought that we give life to either nourishes, poisons, or is neutral to those 50 trillion cells. Now that's a sobering thought. That makes that if I sit around entertaining and stewing on angry thoughts, it's not surprising that my incidence of stomach problems, headaches, and long-term cardiovascular problems, high blood pressure, that it's all related because of the way we're treating, if you will, our own package that we're walking around in, the car that we've been given to drive while we're here in this reality. So that every thought that we give life to has a physiology, and it goes through our limbic system and comes back via thought as a feeling. So we're constantly experiencing the physiology and the feeling of the thinking that we're doing. And then, of course, we have thoughts about the experience that we've just created. And then we have a physiology and a feeling from that. And then we have an experience of that. And sadly, some people get into a cycle of that creates everything from chronic fatigue syndrome to what we call depression, because it starts affecting different circuits in our brain, and then we have an experience via thought of that, and we get caught up in the experience that we lose contact that we're creating it. And I know that for some people that are listening, they're going, what in the hell is he talking about? Because the idea that we're literally creating every experience we have moment to moment via the use of mind, thought, and consciousness is the third principle. And consciousness is the gift that brings to life whatever we think and makes it look real. And so we are literally, every one of us, every moment of our life, we are creating a movie. And no one ever taught me that 7 billion people are walking around thinking the movie that they're creating is the way the world is. And people they say, yeah, but things are happening out there. And that's true. But our experience of it, we all know that 5 people can experience the very same thing happen, whether it's at a party or in a public, and then you have them write down the accounts of what happened, and they could be standing right next to each other, and the accounts and the description of what they experienced as their reality can vary tremendously. So that was that was the first thing for me to realize that I had been innocently spending probably about 6 to 9 hours a day, innocently taking myself, creating a physiology and activating the stress response in my body with the the scientists or the physicians would call the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, but the general public would call the stress response. Everybody knows it. Some people know it as the fight or flight response. And I'm sure you're familiar, Anne, with some of the research that shows that for women and probably some men, but for more women, there's a third option to fight or flight, which is befriend. It's kind of like, do we have to fight or do I have to run away? Is there any chance for us to find some middle ground here and get along? And I think it's sad that in our society, whereas many of the Western nations have had many women leaders, and I would suspect that there's a less apt to go to war, not because they're timid or anything else, but because there's something that allows them to say, we need to try everything else first. We need to try to find some way to get along here. And that system was meant, that stress system was meant and given to us for survival from an external threat, right? So if our ancestors were attacked by a saber-toothed tiger and all they had was a big wooden club, they better have some things happen in their body that make them bigger, stronger, faster, and smarter than they were before the tiger came, right? Or they're going to be lunch, right? And so there's a massive discharge of adrenaline, noradrenaline, what we call epinephrine or norepinephrine, cortisol, massive amounts of glucose released into the bloodstream, massive amounts, which put a tremendous load over time on the pancreas. And we have type 2 diabetes epidemic, right? And we become hyperclotable. Well, that's good to be hyperclotable when you're facing a saber-toothed tiger, because if you are lucky enough to stun him and get away, but he got a swath of your shoulder before you did, then you want to be able to put some furs on that. And if you're hyperclotable, you've got a good chance of stopping the bleeding and surviving. But if I'm worrying about a layoff at the factory, or I'm worrying about my mom's breast cancer, or my dad's alcoholism, or my grandson's cocaine habit, and I'm creating the same level of discharge from my stress response and making me hyperclotable, then I'm setting myself up for deep vein thrombosis, or a blood clot in my heart, clotting off my heart, or my brain vessels, a stroke or a heart attack. And it's tricky to even talk about this because we're all doing the best that we know how to do. So it's not about blaming. I have no blame on myself for 21 years creating my experience of depression because it was innocent. I did not know any better. I was at the conference in London here just recently. Were you there or no? Well, there was a man that Jackie Hollows, who does this work in the prisons. And one of the things you often hear is, well, it can't be that easy. You're saying that just understanding these principles of how the mind works and what resources we have available to us every moment, you're saying that can change people's lives physically, mentally. And I say, yeah, it's true. And one of the questions that often comes up is, well, what about a sociopath or a psychopath? Now, there was a young man there and another young man that she brought to Romania, to the conference in Romania. And the man in England, I'll just call him David, but he was the first speaker of the conference for the first 20 minutes. And there wasn't a dry eye because this man spoke of some traumas that he'd had in his life, some things, but that he then in, I think, 15 years had never been out of prison for, I think, a total of 7 months or something, because every time he was out within 2 or 3 weeks, he would get into a state and then he would, an emotional state and and a physical, and then he would do something that would bring him back to prison. And if you looked at what he did, you would say that he was a sociopath, that he had no feeling for other people. And he would say, I didn't either. I saw potential predators, people that I could steal from or beat up and take what they had. And he talked about how he had these insights that came to him in Jackie's class on Beyond Recovery. And when he got out of prison, he said, the same people that used to look like possible people to take advantage of, I saw as people that might need a little help. That when I got off the bus, maybe they needed help with their bags or needed a hand to get off of the bus. And so I always tell people, your feeling level is always coming out your eyeballs. My father used to have road rage. He's long gone now, but he came to some programs that I did, and he started to have an understanding. And I remember the day, and I won't go into the long story, but he used to see these people on the road that he had an unkind name for them, which I'll just give the initials, SOBs. And one day the SOBs disappeared. There used to be 25 or 30 on the way down to Sarasota when he'd go down to see my brother, who was an optometrist when we lived in Bradenton, Florida. And there'd be 25 SOBs on the way back. And he got so upset, and he thought that they caused him to have all this emotional upset. And it would affect his heart rate. It would affect his shoulder pain, his joint pain, his arthritis. He'd be taking pills. He'd only enjoy maybe 15 minutes out of 2 hours with my brother, because he'd start thinking about it. Just when he got better, he'd start thinking about having to drive back through those SOBs. And one day they disappeared. And I said, Dad, what do you mean they disappeared? He said, I didn't see them anymore. I saw about the same number of people who were caught up in their thinking, and they weren't watching what they were doing. They were beautiful people. And I said a little prayer that they made it home safe, not hurting themselves or anyone else. And that's kind of what happened for David, only David had been doing things that kept putting him back in prison. But he said, I will never be back in prison again, because I know any thoughts that start to lower my feeling level, it's time for me to leave my thinking alone until I feel better. Now, people say, how do you do that? Well, I used to kind of tell people, well, you just do it. You leave your thinking alone. But I see that until you see that you can do that people then try to do it with their brain, And my late wife, Sue, profoundly wise woman, as is my present wife, Linda, who was also widowed, as you know, when we met. But she used to say, I realized, this was 1984 when I was in fellowship with Dr. Roger Mills 35 years ago in Coral Gables, Florida, and Rick Suarez and Kim Cadu, 3 PhD psychologists. And my late wife, Sue, said, I've come to realize, Bill, one night, she said, I realized that moment to moment in my life, I'm either in my life or I'm in my thoughts. One or the other. And one of them is incredibly joyful. Even the difficult times when I'm totally in my life, there's a richness to it. But the times that I get caught up in my thinking, and it's not that there's anything evil about thinking. It's a wonderful gift. If we didn't have it, we'd have to learn how to brush our teeth every morning. We'd have to learn how to put on our clothes. We'd have to learn how to drive a car. It's wonderful, but analytical thinking is not the answer to, I would say, more than about 3% of life's situations. And many of us used to use it for about 97%, and then wonder why life was difficult. and I want to say something and then I want to stop for a moment, but there's a saying that I'm sure you've heard that was attributed to Einstein, and there's some question of whether or not he said it, but even the people that question whether he said it sounds like something he would say. And he said the intuitive mind is a sacred gift. That gift, that place where we just suddenly, and most parents can think of, have many times where they just knew what to say or do for their child. And it was like some wisdom was coming through them and not from their intellect. So Einstein said the intuitive mind is a sacred gift, meaning that it came from the source. The rational analytical mind, its faithful servant. However, we have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift. So for me, it's been a wonderful gift to know, number one, that I can't have any experience that isn't a thought-created experience. And there are some people that will want to make an exception, and even I did at one time. I thought, well, Sid needs to go to medical school. He'd understand the senses. But you can't even have a sensory experience, an experience of your senses without thought. That's why in some cultures more than others, they can even do things like do a C-section where they cut through the lady's abdomen completely with a scalpel, cut through the womb, take the baby out, sew it up under hypnosis. Now, how could you do that except for the fact that the person's consciousness and the direction of their thinking has been taken in a different direction? There are many examples of men and women who've gone back into car accidents and pulled out their babies from the back and did all that unplugging of those and handed the baby off to somebody, and only after that experienced excruciating pain and looked down and saw bones sticking out of both of their arms. But during the time they were saving that baby, their thinking was only one place. That's where the focus of their consciousness was. And that's why even if people have cancer pain that can't be helped with medications without endangering their life, they can literally, and they probably can do this now with gamma knives, I don't know, but all they have to do, if they sever the connections from the thalamus to the cerebral cortex, the person can no longer think the pain receptors input, and so their pain stops. So we can only have a thought-created experience. And people, I say, if there's something to do, if I get lost in a negative feeling, to me, the only thought that makes sense to take seriously is a thought that says, leave your thinking alone until you feel better. And in the meantime, just get in my life. And I tell people, sometimes in that state, I might get into my life and know that I'm at about a 3 out of 10. And if I'm upset that I'm at a 3 out of 10, I'm headed for 2. But if I say, I'm at a 3 out of 10, it's where I am right now. Let me be the best damn 3 that I can be. And as soon as I have gratitude that I'm at a 3 and not a 2, I'm headed for 4. And then if I be the best 4, I'm headed for 5. And sometimes that journey from a 3 to a 9.5 can be as little as 30 seconds because of just being present without judgment where I am. So it's been a wonderful ride. And what I see is that behavior, I didn't really complete the metaphor, but I see that behavior is the caboose of the train. And people, if you can imagine a train that isn't on rails, but is going through like, a countryside or around an amusement park, that you can't change the direction of the train by trying to change the direction of the caboose. It's not going to happen. It's going to get jerked around by the engine. And the engine and the cars in between that of the caboose is whatever thoughts we're giving life to, the experience physiologically and emotionally that we're experiencing, and then the thoughts that we're having about that and the experience that comes from that. And then eventually we feel an urge to act in a certain way that may be not healthy. And if the sooner we pick up that we're off track, we're not going to be crashing. I used to crash. I used to crash emotionally, physically, and in relationships, not knowing that I was even headed for a crash until I crashed, because I was not aware when I got off track. I was not sensitive to my feeling level, to leaving my thinking alone when I usually thought when I was upset that I was onto something. Yeah, and I tell people, have you ever seen anybody who was very bright when they're upset? I haven't. I kiddingly say that people's IQs drop to an average of minus 11.8. You know, so why would I talk when my IQ is at, why would I talk or act when I was at minus 11.8? And to know that all I have to do is get back in my life, and just that getting back in my life, that ball that's being held under the water is released. And before you know it, you're back home. We are never, you know, Linda and my website, I'm sure you've seen it, that is never broken, nothing lacking. Wow. And it's not about people that are interested. There's under resources, there's 12 podcasts that I've done for the Real Change portal in the UK, www.realchange.info. And I researched probably each one of those 3 to 10 hours before I did them. And it's a couple of years ago, but a lot of people's lives have been affected by listening to those. Now, at the same time I say that is before you listen to me, go to www.sidbanks.com and listen to Sid Banks's Long Beach tapes, then maybe his Hawaii tapes, and then the Washington tapes, at least once, if not twice. I would recommend that you do that even before you go to my podcast, because I'm an echo of an echo, and a faint echo of an echo of the man that had the experience, and to me had one of the biggest peeks ever into the mind of God, or whatever you want to call that, which is behind the universe. So let me stop my ramblings.
That's been absolutely wonderful. There are, if anyone would like to ask any questions, then you can either type them into the chat box, or you can, if you want to, you can come on, just let us know that you want to come on and speak. And in the meantime, while I'm waiting to see whether anyone is going to ask any questions, that was so amazing for me. And I don't know if you noticed, I was in tears at one stage. And that was because it suddenly occurred to me, well, you know how it is that we know all this stuff already, except we don't remember we know it. And what came to my mind was that what you were saying was exactly what I went to medical school to hear and never heard it, you know? So when I got to the end of medical school, I was like, is that it? You know, that wasn't it. But I didn't know what it was. I just knew that I hadn't heard I knew that there was something beyond what we'd been taught, that there was something beyond the physical body, and that there was a lot, that the emotion had a lot to do with physical illness. And I was really interested in psychology, but I was not interested in the psychiatric model. So I refused to do psychiatry to do that. And only got into psychotherapy later when I trained in psychosexual medicine. So then I got into psychotherapy.
Yeah.
But even then it was still, no, this is still not it, And I spent 30 years searching for what it was, and had given up I had given up my practice, given up my medical practice, given up my therapy practices, because I was feeling like a fraud because I didn't have the answer. And only so 2009 I retired from all of that, and I only found out about this understanding 5-6 years ago now.
Okay.
If that. So yeah. So what I'm really saying is I really want to share this with.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons I'm doing it with medical students and people who want to be medical students. And yeah. So thank you so much, because that was just perfect for me.
Oh, you're very welcome. And if I can say, one of the things that I've told people for 30 years is that there's really only one cause of all mental illness. It's chronic mental stress, because within 3 minutes of upsetting thinking, if you hook people up to fMRIs and PET scanners, and you get a baseline, they've been doing this for 30 years. They call it activation studies, and the different ways of doing it. That within probably most people 90 seconds, they create a measurable biochemical imbalance in their brain. Now, if you and I do that for 90 seconds or even 3 minutes, and then we stop and we just get back in our life as best, within less than 3 minutes, our body goes back to homeostasis and to balance. The ball comes back to the surface. But so I felt like I've been a voice in the desert, because people say, well, don't you know the ICD-10, there's 370 diagnoses. And then in September of this past year, 2018, there was an article. I don't know if I shared it with you. I'd be glad to. It's called, it was an American Journal of Psychiatry, something about mental illness, one dimension, basically saying there is one cause behind all mental illness. And this is from two researchers, one from King's College in the United Kingdom, and the other one from Duke University, with 131 references. Okay, so they called it a psychopathology factor P, and they weren't sure what it was. So Dr. Tom Kelly and I and Dr. Jack Pransky, and recently Judy Sedgman has joined us, and we're writing a longer article. But in order to get that, we went to a 1,100 word article that got turned down by the American Journal of Psychiatry, but it just recently, in the last 10 days, was accepted in the European Psychiatry Journal by this woman who's an incredible neuroscientist, besides being a psychiatrist, Sophia Frangu, MD, PhD. And it's been accepted in the European Psychiatry Journal. So that's going to, I think, start a dialogue nationally and internationally. And I think will make room for us to be able to put our longer 13, 14 page article that we've been working on, to get that into print. And I told I may be silly, but I told my wife this morning, I feel in the next 12 months, some dramatic things are going to happen. The wall in Berlin went down 10 days after the mayor of East Berlin said it was going to be up for 100 years. So we don't know. And there's something very powerful happening, because people at some level know that they have this mental well-being inside of them. And they just haven't known how to, because they've experienced it. I've never met a person that has never experienced it, but they just thought they were lucky on that day or something. They didn't know that there was an understanding that would allow you to, when you started to lose touch with it, let go of the ball and let it come back to the surface. And that's just so hopeful. I mean, as you know, on my Stories of Hope psychotic disorders, stories of hope, anxiety disorders, stories of hope, depressive disorders, PTSD, addictive disorders, bipolar disorders. There's literally not any section of the ICD-10 that I have not seen in the last 36 years that somebody, one man, as you know, had been in the state hospital for the better part of 47 years. And he suddenly realized he'd been making himself crazy for 47 years by his own thinking. And not only that, he saw that he didn't have to do it anymore. Now, I was not prepared to help. That was 1983, shortly after I'd met Mr. Banks. And it was almost unsettling to me because I wanted to help people, but nobody told me something like this could happen. But I will tell you, once that happened, there was a certainty that I already knew, but had just gotten roots deeper that could not be shaken, that nobody is ever broken and there's nothing lacking. Even people that have traumatic brain injury, the computer can be damaged, but the mind is not made of substance. It's that when I die, somebody could be walking around with a little white box that says Dr. Pettit's brain. Nobody's going to have a little white box that says Dr. Pettit's mind, because that's our connection to that which is at the source of the universe, that we are inextricably tied to, and have access to a wisdom beyond the intellect that's with us 24/7 every day of our life. If, as Sid used to say, if we can get the wax out of our ears enough to listen. And just knowing it's there is enough, because once you know it's there and your workings with your analytical mind is just getting you more confused, even the rat knows not to go down the tunnel if there's no cheese there anymore, even if there used to be. So anyway, it's an incredibly hopeful message. Yeah. Do we have any questions or?
No, nobody's asking any questions. They're all keeping very quiet.
Okay.
So you've obviously said everything they needed to.
Yeah, right.
Or they're completely stunned.
Well, and that's okay. To me, I'm never, when I'm talking with somebody, I'm not invested in anything. I'm really not invested in anything even happening later. I found that investment in the only way that I can mess up any presentation is through either fear or investment. Because if I'm not invested in the outcome and I'm not in fear, then the only things left is to come from a place of love. And I think for a lot of people, that's hard to imagine. They say, you mean when you're with a client, you're not invested? And I said, no, because if I'm invested, it means I've got my ego involved. I'm there as a human being who's seen something that's been beautiful, that I think really gives hope. And I'll share that from my heart, but I'm not invested in what that person does with it, because they're gonna, if I do it in a loving way, they're quite likely, it might be today, it might be 3 days from now, it might be a year from now. They're gonna wake up and go, holy crap. Right? I've had that happen a year later. Holy crap. Now I see what we used to call this flathead therapy. Because when people, they go, shit, I knew this. Right? Anyway.
Yeah, that's
Good
true.
to see you laugh.
Yeah.
It's really nice to meet you. Because have we met before?
No. I couldn't get to the London conference this year because I was so busy doing this,
Sure.
Which was a shame because there were so many people there and they kept, that I knew, and everyone was going, are you coming? No, I can't, because of, and I was there the year before last.
Yeah, I wasn't there.
When Elizabeth and I launched Real Change.
Oh, okay.
Because I was doing the library behind it.
Okay.
But this year I wasn't there. But
well, I hope that this is not our last contact. So
yeah, me too.
I really commend you on what you're doing. And
thank you very much.
Whether it's this or whether it's a combination of an app, somebody said, these kids know social media, and some people like yourself know a lot more than I do, but we now have the ability to reach the world, really. And it's happening. It's
It
happening.
is. It is. Yes, definitely something's changing. And I like with this, I have no idea. You know, I didn't intend to start it. I just woke up one morning and was like, right, I have to do this now.
Yeah.
So that's how it works, right?
That's how the guidance system works. Yeah. If you're open to hearing it. Yeah. That's wonderful.
And so the website has the links to all of Sid's books and his audios and all of yours and your podcast and all of that stuff. So if anyone's hasn't remembered anything that you've said and wants to go to those things and have a look at them, there are links to all of them from the website at thesecretofeverything.com. And below this video on YouTube, there will be a link to your profile page, which will have all those links on it too.
The only other thing that I'll say to people is that as long as Elsie and Chip Chipman are still doing that course on Salt Spring Island twice a year, if people ever get the opportunity to do that, Sid literally purposely asked them to form that school as he, when he knew he was going to be dying, and he did it because he felt that they had heard him most profoundly, at that time. And I've been there twice myself. I think it's an incredible experience, and I would encourage anybody that can, while they're still doing it and still alive, because Elsie was a peer of and her husband worked with Sid in the pulp mill, so she's got a level of understanding. I think that's we all have access to the same, but I think she's accessed it a little more than most of us, myself included. So,
yeah. So there are links to some of her videos on the channel too, but also I will make sure that there are links to the school too.
Yeah, and Chip too. Chip.
Yeah.
And there's other teachers. What the George Pransky has done, and Michael Neal has, and Jamie Smart have touched people that would have probably never been touched by this, and so it's a beautiful thing to watch how this is going forward, because truth is hard to stop. It's impossible. Sid would say it's impossible to stop. Yeah. So
it is, and George obviously hasn't been very well recently, but Erica's coming on later in the week, his daughter.
Oh, good.
And Michael was on last week, and Jamie Smart's on at the end of this week. So
good. Well, I visited George on my way home from Europe, and he's getting stronger every day from his surgery, and we laughed a lot. He and I, whenever we're together, he says he's funnier when I'm around, but I don't know. I think we're both funnier, or we both think we're funnier or something. I don't know. We just laugh a lot. And I said, I think laughter is probably one of the most powerful healing things there is. Here's a question before we stop.
There's something now, yes. Oh, okay, so go ahead. Would you like to come on to ask your question?
Thomas Martin.
Thomas, would you? Okay, let me see. Can you please say something about severe depression?
Yeah. Thomas, as I said earlier, I went in and out of depression for many years. And I would encourage you to, it's not even, this is hard for beginners. Depression is not a thing. It's a manifestation of chronic mental stress in some people. So if a person gets into a state of chronic mental stress, if you have 3 people get into the same state of chronic mental stress for the same period of time, some people will start to affect the connections between areas in their brain that affect mood and energy and fatigue, and then when you get a complex set of symptoms that are alarms, to me the symptoms of depression are alarms. As soon as your mood starts going down, that's a sign to me now that I'm using my thinking in a way I need to leave it alone. anxiety going up, physical discomfort. All of those are alarm systems. So if you affect certain circuits in the brain, they've given that a label and they've called it depression. but all that is a label. But then sadly, what we've done is turned around and said, look what depression does to the brain. And that was just a label of what chronic mental stress does in this person. In somebody else, it'll manifest as severe chronic migraine headaches. Somebody else, it'll manifest as hearing voices, which are just thoughts with special effects, right? Somebody else, it'll affect their anxiety so much they're having 3 to 4 panic attacks a day. And what they've noticed is that many people have a combination of all of these things because they're all louder and louder alarms that the person is innocently. And I ask not only Thomas, but everybody else to hear that word innocently. There's no blame coming from Dr. Pettit about anything you've experienced or I've experienced. We have done the best we have known at the level of spiritual and psychological understanding. But I will say that coming to insight-based understanding of these 3 universal principles, it's like anytime you understand the system, you're going to be much more likely to benefit from the potential of that system. And that's potential is unlimited. So I hope that's it. I would encourage you to listen to Mr. Banks's videos. I'd encourage you to read The Missing Link. He has 5 other books too. I would encourage you to listen to my podcast on One Cause, One Cure. And then since you're specifically interested, you might listen to the one on depressive disorders, but also bipolar disorders and also anxiety disorders, because they're all manifestations of a chronic state of mental stress. And there is an answer. And mental well-being is our default setting. It's our default setting. And that's really hopeful. You're not damaged, you're not broken. That's all I'd say. Nor is, if it's somebody else, they aren't either. Yeah.
So there's plenty there to listen to, and there will be links for all of this that you can have a listen to that, Thomas, and don't try and work it out.
No, just be open to listening for new information. Yeah, just that desire to listen quietly, as Mr. Banks says. You know, the words I'm just using to try to point, but if you keep looking at my finger, you're not going to see what I'm pointing to. And but and the nice thing, like you've said, Anne, what a neat thing that what we're looking for, we already have. And that's different than trying to learn differential calculus or something. But this, we already have this wisdom within us, and we already have happiness inside. It's inside, it comes with the package, and it can't be destroyed. It can't even be scratched. And I'm just asking people to be open to that possibility. So is this maybe a good place to stop?
It's exactly perfect. Thank you very much. So thank you everyone for being here. And thank you so much for coming and speaking to us like that. It's just perfect for me.
Good.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
See you later. Bye.